you have ever stopped to think that everything you call love might be imprisoning you?
That the desire to be chosen, desired, and loved can be your greatest weakness and not your strength? In this video, you will discover the cruel truth that women and the world do not want you to know. A truth that Friedrich Nietzsche uncovered with a hammer in hand to destroy your illusions and reveal who you really are behind the masks. Prepare yourself for a journey that will confront your fears, break the invisible chains of emotional dependence, and show why being a man who does not beg for love is the greatest threat to this system. If you want true freedom, stop everything you are doing and stay with me until the end, because what comes next can change your life or reaffirm the prison you live in without realizing it. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. But first, I want to know your opinion. What is worse, chasing someone who does not value you, or facing silence and learning to be enough for yourself? That behind all the distractions, the incessant search for validation, and the desire to be loved, there is an invisible trap that holds millions in a cycle of emotional dependence and self-denial. Since childhood, we are conditioned to seek external approval as a sign of value and survival, learning to shape our identity according to others' looks and expectations. The system, consciously or not, benefits from this behavior because emotionally dependent people are easier to control, manipulate, and keep trapped in their own invisible prisons. That is why everything around us, media, culture, relationships, reinforces the idea that being chosen and desired is the pinnacle of existence, while silence, solitude, and self-encounter are painted as dangerous and undesirable. Furthermore, the world does not want you to realize that what you call love is often nothing more than fear in disguise. The fear of loneliness, of emptiness, of rejection, which leads to a constant escape to emotional crumbs, to performance, and to the game of pleasing at any cost. True freedom requires looking inward, facing the shadow, those parts of yourself that were buried to be accepted and loved, and accepting the pain of silence and solitude. But this breaks the script society wrote for you. Men and women who do not beg for love and who do not bow to expectations are seen as threats to the system, because a free individual cannot be bought, seduced, or manipulated. That is why there is silent resistance to keep you from ever discovering this path. The world does not want you to realize that this desperate search to be desired and loved is a prison disguised as purpose and personal fulfillment. You grow up believing that happiness and the meaning of life are in others' approval. But the more you chase it, the farther you get from your true essence. What you really want is relief, a momentary escape from the emptiness you feel when you are alone with yourself. This illusion is kept alive to ensure that you never become a sovereign man or woman who walk firmly in their own truth, even if that means facing the discomfort of rejection and temporary isolation. It is in this internal battle that the secret to freedom resides. Stop desperately wanting what the world insists on selling as essential. Finally, the world does not want you to realize that real power lies in becoming who you truly are. Without masks, without roles, without depending on others' gaze and touch to validate your existence. Freeing yourself from this emotional prison means embracing solitude, facing silence, and accepting that true intimacy is born when you stop performing and start being genuine. This frightens because it dismantles all the comfortable narratives we have been given since childhood. But it is the only path to authentic freedom. It is one of the deepest and most universal dilemmas of the human experience, because it reveals the difficulty we have in facing our own self without external distractions. From an early age, we learn to flee the emptiness that silence imposes, seeking to fill internal spaces with noise, movement, company, and constant stimuli. This fear is not simply the dread of being alone, but the terror of facing what lives inside us, our deepest thoughts, hidden fears, repressed desires, and truths we avoid. Silence and solitude act as cruel mirrors, reflecting an image we often do not want to see. a bare and vulnerable face that society taught us to hide at all costs. Furthermore, the fear of silence is deeply connected to the fear of rejection and incompleteness. When we are alone, without distractions or interlocutors, we are forced to confront our fragilities, the doubts we suppress with activities and superficial connections. This confrontation can be painful because it exposes the abyss between who we are and who we would like to be, revealing our insecurities and emotional needs. That is why we incessantly seek company, noise, and external validation, because it is easier to endure a life full of stimuli than to face internal emptiness. Solitude then becomes synonymous with weakness and failure for many, a state to be avoided at any cost. However, the fear of silence and solitude is also the prison that prevents true growth and self-knowledge. To find authenticity, it is necessary to accept the discomfort of solitude, allowing silence to reveal what is hidden in our soul. It is in this space without distractions that the mind can organize itself, consciousness deepens, and the answers we seek in the noise of the world emerge. Ignoring this process means living in constant escape, where relationships and external stimuli act as anesthetics, keeping us away from our true self and the freedom born of self-acceptance. Facing the fear of silence is therefore a revolutionary act against the superficiality and alienation that modern society imposes. Finally, understanding and overcoming the fear of silence and solitude is fundamental to achieving inner peace and true emotional autonomy. Healthy solitude is not a punishment, but a necessary state for us to build a solid relationship with ourselves, free from dependence and anxiety caused by others' gaze. Silence, far from being an enemy, is the fertile ground where creativity, wisdom, and inner strength are born. It is born from a deep and invisible need that few dare to recognize, the fear of being alone with oneself. Unlike healthy love, which is freedom and mutual growth, emotional dependence imprisons, suffocates, and transforms relationships into invisible chains where affection becomes a currency and external validation becomes the only source of self-esteem. Those who live in this dependence lose the ability to recognize themselves as a complete and autonomous being, handing over their emotional power into the hands of another, hoping to fill an internal void that can only be healed through self-acceptance and self-knowledge. This emotional void, however, is not merely an empty space, but a fertile field for insecurity, anxiety, and fear. Emotional dependence creates an unbalanced exchange dynamic, where the I dissolves to maintain the we at the cost of authenticity and self-respect. This exchange is marked by a repetitive cycle of frustrated expectations, jealousy, demands, and suffering, because true emotional security cannot be built on the instability of another. The emotionally dependent person lives in a constant search for approval and affection, as if this would guarantee their emotional survival, not realizing that this pursuit only reinforces the feeling of emptiness and helplessness. Furthermore, emotional dependence is deeply connected to wounds from the past, such as traumas, rejections, and unresolved emotional needs. Often, it is the result of a childhood marked by the lack of genuine affection or abusive relationships, which created a behavioral pattern that perpetuates the fear of solitude and rejection. Therefore, breaking free from emotional dependence requires an internal healing process in which the individual must recognize their own pains, learn to love themselves, and establish healthy boundaries. It is a difficult path because it implies confronting old fears and deconstructing limiting beliefs that shaped how they relate to the world and themselves. Finally, emotional freedom is only possible when we understand that true love begins within us, in the ability to be well alone, to be complete without needing another to validate our existence. Emotional dependence is a silent prison that prevents personal growth and the building of genuine relationships based on respect, reciprocity, and freedom. Freeing yourself from it is rediscovering your own power, cultivating self-esteem, and accepting that happiness does not depend on anyone's presence or approval. but on the honest and loving relationship we establish with ourselves. They represent a powerful metaphor for the radical philosophical method that the German thinker used to deconstruct values, beliefs, and illusions that sustain morality, religion, and social structures. For Nietzsche, truth is not something fixed or comfortable, but something to be struck, broken, and constantly rebuilt. The hammer is the symbol of destructive criticism that exposes the false, the hypocritical, and the dogmatic, opening the way for a new understanding of being, free from the shackles imposed by tradition and dominant culture. This brutal and profound attitude reveals Nietzsche's desire for a human consciousness awakening that must face reality naked and raw, without the layers of illusions that the mind creates to protect itself. By wielding his hammer, Nietzsche dismantles the pillars of traditional morality, especially that influenced by Christianity, which he considered a slave morality, a morality that denies life, values weakness, and represses the deepest instincts of the human being. This destruction is painful because it topples symbolic comforts that sustain people's identity and psychological security. The hammer of truth, therefore, is not an empty attack but a call to courage. It is necessary to face the abyss of existence, question everything that was taken for granted, and accept the responsibility for creating new values. Nietzsche wanted man to become a creator, an artist of life, and for that, the blow of the hammer is necessary to clear the ground and prepare the emergence of the overman, the Bermensch. However, Nietzsche's hammer does not destroy for destruction's sake. It is also the instrument that enables reconstruction, rebirth. After tearing down old beliefs, man finds the freedom to forge his own path without clinging to absolute certainties or immutable truths. Truth, for Nietzsche, is a moving horizon, a dynamic process of self-transformation. The hammer thus symbolizes the internal revolution that each individual must carry out to break free from dependence on external systems of values and assume the creation of their own existence, with all the contradictions and challenges that this entails. This is the truth that frees, even if it is uncomfortable and lonely. Finally, understanding Nietzsche and his hammer of truth is to comprehend the hardness necessary for genuine self-knowledge and radical authenticity. There is no evolution without pain, nor freedom without rupture. The hammer reminds us that often it is necessary to destroy old certainties and accept inner chaos to find a life worth living. Nietzsche challenges us to leave the comfort zone of illusions and face truth with bravery, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This courage is the essence of the free spirit, who does not fear the silence of solitude nor the absence of easy answers. Are concepts that frequently come into conflict within human relationships, especially when love finds itself trapped by expectations, appearances, and external needs. Often, what is presented as love is nothing more than a performance, a role we play to please, conquer, or keep someone, based more on a facade than on authentic feelings. This acting can involve everything from superficial gestures to the repression of true emotions, all to maintain an idealized image that satisfies the other or society. Love, in this context, becomes a representation, a continuous act of mutual approval that, despite appearing connected, rarely touches the depth of the soul. When love is reduced to a performance, it loses its genuine essence, which is vulnerability and unconditional acceptance of the other, including their flaws, fears, and contradictions. True human connection cannot be sustained by masks and unrealistic expectations, because it demands an authentic encounter between two individualities, each with its complexity. Performance, therefore, creates an invisible barrier that prevents love from flourishing fully, because by focusing on what the other expects to see, we sacrifice important parts of who we really are. This generates a cycle of emotional wear, anxiety, and frustration, because the persona presented is never completely real, and, over time, this farce becomes unsustainable. Furthermore, performance in love can lead to a dangerous dependence on others' opinions, turning the relationship into a constant search for external approval. True love, on the other hand, is born from freedom, the freedom to be who you are, without fear of judgment, and the courage to accept the other in their entirety. In this sense, true love does not demand that you act or shape yourself to fit others' expectations, but rather that you surrender with authenticity, even if this implies risks and imperfections. It is a love that values emotional depth and sincerity above appearances and seeks mutual growth instead of simple, immediate satisfaction. Finally, understanding the difference between performance and true love is fundamental to building stronger, healthier, and more meaningful relationships. Breaking free from the need to perform is an act of courage that demands self-knowledge and the will to free oneself from social shackles that condition us to create an idealized image. True love is not a rehearsed play to be shown, but an organic and unpredictable process that happens in authentic surrender and real acceptance of the other. The price of freedom. It is one of the hardest truths a human being can face. Freedom is not a gift received without cost, but an achievement that demands courage, sacrifice, and often the renunciation of the comfort of illusory security. To lie free means to break the chains of social expectations, others' opinions, and one's own comfort zones, which can generate a deep feeling of loneliness and insecurity. Freedom is, above all, a constant challenge of self-mastery and responsibility, for with it comes the obligation to make conscious decisions and assume the consequences without seeking excuses or external justifications. On the path to freedom, we are often called to give up toxic bonds, emotionally dependent relationships, and even certainties that protected us from the anguish of the unknown. This abandonment is not simple, for true freedom implies confronting the void that can arise when external shackles are broken. The price paid is the pain of detachment and the confrontation with oneself, where the individual must face their own essence without masks or subterfuge. This process, although painful, is essential to build an authentic existence in which freedom is not an abstract concept but a daily practice. Moreover, freedom demands constant internal vigilance so that it does not turn into mere whim or an escape from responsibilities. True freedom is not the absence of limits, but the ability to consciously choose one's own limits, aligning actions and personal values without being imprisoned by illusions or compulsions. The price of freedom, therefore, is also the price of discipline and emotional maturity, for only those who know and master themselves can exercise true free will. This freedom demands courage to say no when everything around encourages yes, and to be alone when company is only a distraction from one's own path. Finally, understanding the price of freedom is understanding that the path to autonomy is lonely and arduous, but deeply liberating. Those who choose to live free must accept that this choice implies sacrifices and pain, but also immense gains. The possibility of being whole, creating one's own identity, and living in harmony with one's deepest values. The price paid for freedom is the abandonment of false securities, the acceptance of uncertainty, and the permanent commitment to inner truth. The rebellion of the free man is not merely an isolated act of defiance against external authority, but a deep and essential movement born from the intrinsic need to affirm one's own existence. The free man refuses to passively accept norms imposed by society, beliefs inherited without questioning, and limitations placed by systems of power or dominant culture. This rebellion arises as a manifestation of the will for autonomy, the search for authenticity, and the refusal to live a life that does not truly belong to him. It is a cry against alienation, a refusal to be shaped like an object, and an intense desire for self-affirmation that transcends social conventions. However, this rebellion is more complex than simply denying or destroying. It implies the construction of a new meaning for life, where the free man creates his own values and redefines his relationship with himself and the world. By rebelling, he not only rejects what imprisons him, but seeks to reinvent himself, going through moments of crisis and inner conflict that put him face to face with his own shadows and limitations. The rebellion of the free man is, therefore, a painful process that requires courage to face loneliness, fear, and the incomprehension of those who remain trapped in the shackles of conformity. This rebellion also carries a high price: social rejection, loss of old bonds, and the constant struggle against the impulse to return to the security of comfortable mediocrity. The free man must resist the temptations of accommodation and remain firm in the search for personal truth, even when this makes him a stranger among crowds. It is a resistance that demands discipline, self-awareness, and an unwavering commitment to one's own essence, even if that means swimming against the current and carrying the burden of incomprehension. Deep down, this rebellion is an internal battle, not to get lost amid external and internal voices that want to conform him. Finally, the rebellion of the free man is not an act of selfishness or empty rebellion, but the highest expression of human freedom. It is the refusal to live a life governed by fear, lies, or submission, and the affirmation of the capacity to create and shape one's destiny. This rebellion, when genuine, is a flame that illuminates the path to true individuation and transcendence. The price of authenticity is one of the deepest challenges any person can face in their journey of self-knowledge and inner freedom. To be authentic means to live according to one's own truth, to express oneself without masks, to assume one's genuine desires, fears, and values, even when this contradicts external expectations. However, this stance requires courage because authenticity often demands breaking social patterns, detaching from toxic or superficial relationships, and facing judgment and rejection from those who prefer to see an idealized or conformist version of you. The price, therefore, is not monetary but existential and emotional. It is the cost of carrying the weight of truth in a world that often values appearance and convenience. Living authentically can provoke a feeling of isolation because authenticity exposes who we really are, with all our contradictions, imperfections, and uniqueness. Often, by embracing this inner truth, the individual distances themselves from the masses and relationships based on superficiality, conformity, or selfish interests. This creates a constant tension between the desire to belong and the need to be faithful to oneself. The price, therefore, is also the loneliness that may arise from rejecting social masks and predefined roles that protect us from vulnerability, but also imprison us in a false identity. Moreover, authenticity implies a permanent commitment to self-development because being true is not a fixed state, but a dynamic process of discovery and reinvention. It means being willing to confront one's own shadows, accept flaws, and learn from mistakes, even when this causes discomfort or inner conflict. This process demands discipline, brutal honesty, and a rare capacity for self-compassion, since the search for authenticity can expose deep wounds and insecurities that many would rather avoid. Thus, the price of authenticity is the constant struggle against self-denial and the temptation to escape reality for the comfort of illusion. Finally, although the price of authenticity may seem high, it is also the only currency worth paying to achieve a full and meaningful life. Authenticity is the foundation of true freedom, solid self-esteem, and genuine relationships. For only those who are faithful to themselves can truly connect with others and the world. The man who wants nothing. He is a figure that challenges the conventions of desire and the relentless pursuit that permeates human existence. Unlike those who live in constant agitation, chasing goals, status, or recognition, this man finds in detachment a unique form of freedom. He is neither apathetic nor uninterested, but possesses an inner clarity that transcends the compulsive need to possess or control the world around him. By wanting nothing, he does not surrender to emptiness or passivity, but reaches a state where presence in the present moment is full, and external motivations lose their power over him. This attitude, although rare, reveals a deep wisdom about what truly matters in life. This man who wants nothing carries with him an aura that can be both intriguing and intimidating to others. In a society driven by ambition and competition, he seems to break the implicit code that an individual's value lies in what they achieve or possess. His freedom is seen as indifference, his calmness is coldness, and his lack of desires is weakness. But in truth, he is immune to the traps of ego and others' expectations. He does not chase approval, beg for affection, or despair over fame. On the contrary, he chooses a path of authenticity and serenity, where the absence of worldly desires is not emptiness, but an open space for self-knowledge and inner peace. On the other hand, the stance of the man who wants nothing can generate discomfort and even rejection in social interactions, because it exposes the frenzy and anxiety of those always running after something. He challenges the fast pace of the world and forces us to question our own desires and motivations. This apparent indifference is, in fact, a form of resistance against emotional consumerism and the superficiality of relationships based on interests. He reminds us that true strength lies in not letting oneself be dominated by external impulses, but in cultivating internal autonomy and the ability to be whole with oneself, even in the absence of great ambitions. Finally, the man who wants nothing is not a passive character, but a representation of radical freedom and conscious detachment. He invites reflection on what is truly worth desiring and what can be left behind to live a more authentic life, less bound to illusions. This absence of wanting nothing does not mean absence of life, but rather the possibility to choose one's own values without being a slave to external pressures. The invitation to transformation is a profound and often silent call that arises when we are confronted with the need for inner change. This invitation is not just a simple suggestion or a passing impulse, but an existential summons to abandon old forms, beliefs, and patterns that no longer serve us. To transform implies a courageous movement toward the unknown, where the comfort of routine gives way to the restlessness of growth. Accepting this invitation is accepting the challenge of looking inward, facing one's own shadows, and making space for rebirth. It is a process that demands humility, patience, and above all, a real will to reinvent oneself. At the core of this invitation is the recognition that stagnation is a poison for the soul, an invisible prison that limits human potential. True transformation is not superficial. It is not reduced to external changes or following fads. It dwells in the core of being, in the reformulation of attitudes, values, and perceptions. It is an invitation to dissolve the rigid ego and its absolute certainties, allowing vulnerability and impermanence to become allies on the journey. This metamorphosis can be painful because it implies losses and deconstructions, but is also liberating because it frees the individual from invisible chains that imprison them to a limited version of themselves. Furthermore, the invitation to transformation is always present in moments of crisis, rupture, or deep pain. It is in these intervals of suffering that the soul is forced to awaken, to find new paths and meanings. Transformation does not happen despite suffering, but often because of it. It is a call to courage to face inner chaos, to leave the comfort zone, and to embrace the mystery of what is yet to be discovered. This invitation imposes no deadlines or rules. It respects each person's time but leaves no room for complacency. It is a stimulus for continuous evolution, a reminder that we are beings in constant becoming. Finally, accepting the invitation to transformation is accepting responsibility for one's own life and destiny. It is understanding that despite external circumstances, change always begins within us. This invitation makes us protagonists of our story, active agents who can choose to abandon the old to build something truer and fuller. Transformation is not a distant destination, but a constant invitation always within our reach. Every step taken toward the new, even if small, is a victory over stagnation and a move toward a more authentic and meaningful life. If you felt this call resonate within you, know that this is the opportunity to embrace change and take control of your own path. If you want to continue exploring themes that awaken consciousness and drive your personal evolution, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Here, we will together unveil truths that the world often tries to hide and strengthen the journey toward a life of freedom, authenticity, and purpose. Do not miss the next videos. Your transformation begins now. Some think this was the end. But beware, the war is not over yet. There are still things left unsaid. These two videos in front of you are not here by chance. What if everything you believe about yourself is just a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside and start breaking this mirror. You will have to risk the click. So, which one will you choose?